I'm Steve Bookbinder. I'm the CEO and lead trainer for DMTraining. We are a sales development company headquartered in New York City. We work with clients all over the world who are attempting to do what I believe is the most difficult, most challenging, and most rewarding thing in business, which is to grow their business, specifically grow sales by entering new markets, selling new products, finding new distributors, and gaining a competitive advantage, and controlling the growth, and accurately forecasting along the way. I'll show you how I do that in today's presentation. Let's talk about how we engineer a sales process by first comparing it to the manufacturing process, which is very well engineered. See, in the manufacturing process, you have a beginning, middle, and an end. In the sales process, we have a beginning, middle, and an end. Except in the manufacturing process, we begin with the end. What's our output? What do we want to produce, and when do we want it produced by? How many units are we producing? Based on that, we build a process, and that process guarantees the output. In sales, a whole different thing happens. Most salespeople think they know how to sell. They all have their own way, and they all have their own words to describe everything. There's usually no connection between the output and the initial activities. And when things are in the middle of the sales process, if you ask two salespeople where their sale is, you'll find they don't share a similar language. They don't have a way of describing where in the process it is in a way that means the same thing to the manager and the salespeople and the other people on the team, making it very difficult to replicate winning strategies or to know what you're working on until we get to the end of the year and determine whether or not we were ever successful or not. I'd rather my sales process was as predictable as my manufacturing process. To do that, we introduce the pipeline management system. Sales can be thought of as if running through a pipeline. And where in the pipeline each sale is will give us a lot of information. We'll then take a deeper dive into how do we make the process more efficient by looking at sales cycles, conversion rates, retention rates, and average sales value. And we put all those concepts together, we're going to show you what your pipeline looks like. Let me explain something about pipelines. Whether you've organized your sales opportunities into a pipeline or not, sales come from pipelines. Those people who are organized, who could visualize the pipeline, have created a literal pipeline, can tell what they're working on and how to adjust their activity now to change future results. But people who have not organized their work into a pipeline still have a pipeline, except they can't see it. So they don't know what to expect and what they need to do differently now to change the output that they're going to get in a year. Well, what does that pipeline look like? Well, let's imagine it this way. Every sale has a beginning, and it has an end. And the end is when you close, and the beginning is when we have a lead, a name of a person we're going to go after. And there are 4 phases in the middle. And it's easiest to see those phases if you go from the last phase back to the first phase. So just before we close, we have this phase where we're waiting for a contract. I call that phase, phase D. And just before a sale gets to phase D, we're waiting for a decision. So I call that phase C. And just before our sale is at the waiting for a decision phase, we're figuring out what deal to present to them. We're gaining information. We're qualifying them, and they're qualifying us. And during that qualifying phase, we're calling that a B phase sale. And just before we get to that phase, we have our initial conversation where we're first talking to somebody new or talking to somebody we talked to once before, but about a new deal or a new price or a new season's worth of new products. Well, phase A, B, C, and D. If the first thing we did was just put each sales opportunity into the right phase, the first thing you'd find is that the actual pipeline that you have is different than the pipeline that you thought. You thought you had more stuff, you may have less stuff. You may also find that there are 4 phases, but not every sale neatly fits into one of those 4 phases. The more we are able to separate out from the pack only those 4 phases, the more we're going to see sales that are more likely to close. And the more time we spend with them, the more efficient we'll be, because efficiency happens when you maximize your time with people more likely to buy, and we minimize our time with people less likely to buy. And the people that are not in those 4 phases are in fact less likely to buy. When most people look at their pipeline, the problem is that they ask themselves the wrong question. They look at their pipeline and they say, is there enough stuff in my pipeline? Because everybody wants to believe more is better, that quantity is more important than quality. But in fact, it's a blend of quantity and quality that produces the pipeline that helps you hit your goal. Let's combine the concept of the pipeline management system correctly implemented into a sales team and the notion of an engineered sales process so that we could ask and answer this most important question, which is, how many sales do you need each month to close? Well, let's suppose, to make the numbers easy, you decide you need 3 sales to close each month. Well, using pipeline management, it's very easy to see if you're on track to get there. Specifically, what do I need? Well, I specifically need in phase D 5 opportunities that are just about to close. Based on my most recent conversation with the customer, I now know exactly when it's going to happen, when the contract will be delivered, or when to expect the purchase order, or when I'm going to be able to invoice. And I know specifically 5 of those will give me 3 closes. The bad news, however, is that once one of those rock-solid, sure thing, phase D sales opportunities in fact closes, then I no longer have 5 things. So the game of pipeline management is to manage or maintain the right number and quality of prospects at each phase. So I always need 5 at phase D. So I now can figure out how many more things I need at C, specifically how many things I need at B, and exactly what I'll need at A in order to give me B, C, and maintain my Ds. Once I've built my ideal pipeline, it's like plugging into an address into my satellite navigation. I know where I'm trying to get to. And so what the average salesperson will then do is start populating their pipeline. They'll start adding things. Every time they have a meeting, they'll add it. And they'll more likely add than take something out. The problem is that they defend that decision with emotional criteria, with subjective criteria, which I call confidence ratings. Because they're confident that something will happen, they keep counting on it, which dramatically throws off our forecast. Well, I'm going to recommend a different approach, one that looks at objective criteria that I call set points. Let me explain. Depending upon where a sale is, where between beginning and end, the odds of it happening actually change. So in general, I want sales that are greater than 50% probability to be in my D stage, and my less than 50% sales to be at my B stage, and even less than that, maybe 10% likely to happen in my A stage, which is my first meeting stage. Let's take a pipeline and plug it in with simulated examples. So here where we're looking at is different opportunities within each phase, different amount of money in each phase. Now, the normal salesperson will just simply add up all the money associated with all of the different opportunities in all of the phases. But in my way of looking at it, let's say we determine that in your sales case, 67% of the sales that reach D, in fact, close. Then I could confidently apply a 67% weight to everything in the D stage. And let's say we determine 40% is your C stage, 25% is your B stage, and look what I've just done. I've applied a reasonable weight to the total amount of money we could expect at each of those phases. This sharpens your forecast. The more we understand what your actual conversion rate is, the more accurate the forecast will be, which is how come we're able to help our clients become increasingly accurate with their forecast the longer we work together. Do you and your salespeople know what their average sales cycle is? Do you know what your average amount of time it takes to close large sales average size sales, and small sales? Well, if you don't know, you run the risk of having inaccurate forecasts and inefficient salespeople. Let me explain why. The average salesperson will make a mistake. They'll keep working on something until it closes, rather than look at the statistics, which is what I show your sales team to do. Let's look at what your average sales cycle is. Let's take every sale we're working on and compare it to the sales like that sale that closed. And what we may determine is that your average size sale takes, let's say, 6 months, and your average small sale takes, let's say, 3 months, and your average large sale takes, let's say, 9 months. And what that says is, let's stop counting on those size sales when they exceed that timeline. The average salesperson does it the opposite way. After spending a lot of time with any account, they're reluctant to let it go. It's called sunk cost thinking, because they've sunk so much of their time and energy and investment into those sales, they're afraid to let them go. And what happens is they end up spending more and more of their time with sales opportunities which are statistically less and less likely to happen. Then we're going to look at sales conversion ratio. So if you looked at a pipeline of some salesperson on your team, and that pipeline had, let's say, 11 prospects, can you expect 11 sales to happen? All 11? 11 average size sales? 11 big sales? Well, let's say we actually knew the conversion ratio. We knew of all the sales we work on, how many were expected to close. How many big sales will convert, how many average size sales will convert, how many small sales will convert. And to make the numbers easy, let's say that we've figured out we're closing 18% of the prospects in our pipeline. That now gives us a huge leg up. We now know the formula. In order to reliably produce those 2 sales with our 18% conversion ratio, we're going to need 11 prospects. Now, let's take that concept and answer this question. How do I evaluate the productivity of my sales force? Well, if everybody on the team has a different conversion ratio, and they all will. It's not only about experience, it's not only about sales ability, but every different product, every different territory may bring with it its own conversion ratios and sales cycles. But once we personalize everybody's numbers, now the manager can look at everybody and see, do they have what they need? So if I have that 18% conversion ratio, I need 11 prospects. Maybe somebody else on the team has a better conversion ratio and needs fewer prospects. Do each of us have what each of us needs for us to be successful? Now, how do I monitor the monthly activity of my sales force, especially in a work from home world? We don't want to micromanage anybody, but we want to be able to see from the output of their activity, are they on track to hit their goal? Well, with the pipeline management system, that becomes easy to do. We can monitor everybody by just simply looking at the pipeline. In fact, the shape alone will tell us whether it's a healthy pipeline or an unhealthy pipeline. You see, the healthy pipeline is always shaped in that way where it's a triangle, where there are fewer things at D, more things at C, more things at B, more things at A, which tells us that that person is doing the right amount of prospecting all the time and they're correctly balancing prospecting and selling. But the salesperson with the unhealthy pipeline, several things about it. First of all, we can forecast that they're going to make some sales in the short term, but they're going to hit the wall in the long term. So we not only can forecast what they're going to do, but what they've been doing. But beyond that, we also can stop a problem in its tracks. The salesperson with an unhealthy pipeline that has pressure to close sales will keep going back and back and back to the few people in their pipeline. And as those sales cycles expire, they'll continue to work on them. And now those sales are even less likely to happen, but the salesperson is more desperate, and so they will negotiate poorly because they're so anxious to close the deal. How do I then take all of that so I could use the pipeline management system across an entire sales organization? Well, watch. Suppose we take every single sale from each salesperson. We could see which ones are contributing, which phases they're in. We now know who's been prospecting, who's not, who's more efficient, who's not. And we can, as a company, determine, are we on track to hit our goal? Knowing the overall company's conversion ratio, knowing the average sales cycle, we could prune away all the sales that we shouldn't count on. We could focus on what's left. We could compare the final picture to the ideal pipeline to see if we're on track. But if we're not on track, we could see it soon enough to course correct before we get to the end of the year. When I work with your team, I'm going to help your team do 5 important things. The first thing, we're going to analyze together so that we learn your average conversion rate, your average sales cycle, your average sales value. Then that gets us to step 2, where we're building the pipeline. Step 3, where we're assessing the pipeline quality, pruning out the things that don't belong, maintaining the prospect, the right prospects in the pipeline. And we're going to do it by looking week over week over week at sales activity. We're going to look at 4 things that you ought to be looking at right now. The total number of first appointments that your team generated this week over last week. The total number of prospects in their pipeline. The total value of the prospects and average value, so that we're not only maintaining the right activity, but we're going after the right size accounts, the right blend of big and small accounts. Our time together will really be 4 pillars, with the first pillar being the correct implementation of the pipeline management system, which is not merely about teaching somebody how it works, but it's working with them to make sure they continue to follow the pipeline management principles. In so doing, they'll learn the process involves strategizing. A lot of accounts that we wish were advancing are not, and they're not going to advance until we adapt and adopt our sales techniques. We use echo selling. We understand the psychology of selling, which appreciates that the customer has changed how they buy, how they go through the buying process. So I will introduce a number of tactics, strategies, skills, and I'll show you a variety of ways to track what you're doing to constantly optimize and make more efficient the sales process. What will happen as a result of that? Your forecasting will continuously improve. The sharper we are with your metrics, the sharper your forecast will be. And over time, the meetings, the questions, the inspections will change your sales culture, because everybody on the team will be enjoying and using the same language. We'll all be talking about conversion ratios in the same way as each other. Everybody in the organization will work toward getting your pipeline to look right. And when that happens, you will get the sales you seek. If you want more information, please contact me.